What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Humanity Matters broadcast, and I am your host, Dr. Philip Fletcher. Today, we will have a Humanity Matters one-on-one discussion with my guest, Rachel Ferguson. And as always, connect with me on my website, philipfletcher.org. That's Philip with two L's, philipfletcher.org. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. We are broadcasting live on Facebook as well as over on YouTube. Subscribe, put in my name, Philip Fletcher. You can see it, a lot of great video content. Subscribe or appreciate any type of review. Hey, if you miss any part of this one-on-one discussion today, it will be uploaded as well over on anchor.fm. And so wherever you get your podcast, that's anchor.fm, Spotify, Google, all that good stuff. Hey, subscribe, listen to the content, leave me a review. I would greatly appreciate it. Always looking for sponsors for the show. Helps do some work, equipment, and all of that good stuff. You can make a sponsorship. I'll even show a commercial for your business or nonprofit. Hit me up, pfletcher73@gmail.com. And then finally, if you've got a question and you want to be in the mailbag, we're not doing the mailbag this week. Have an opportunity for you to interact live with our guests. But any other time, send an email to humanitymatterspodcast@gmail.com, humanitymatterspodcast@gmail.com. And so today we have got with us Rachel Ferguson. How's it going, Rachel?
Going well. Hi.
Good. So Rachel Ferguson is a professor of managerial philosophy and director of the Liberty and Ethics Center in the Hammond Institute. Her research interests include Hume's classical liberalism, the philosophy of economics, and Aristotelian virtue theory. She is a board member for the Freedom Center of Missouri and the Love the Lou. I love that. And serves on the advisory boards of ReThink 315 and Gateway to Flourishing. Ferguson teaches political philosophy, game theory, and business ethics. She also facilitates the course on economic federalism that accompanies the Liberty and Ethics Center's spring conference. In addition, Rachel coordinates a collection of liberty-oriented faculty from mid-sized Midwestern universities, which aims to engage with constitutional law and economics at the faculty, undergraduate, and high school levels. Dr. Ferguson received her Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy from Linwood University and her PhD in Philosophy from St. Louis University. Hey, welcome, Rachel. How are you doing today?
Good. Doing very well. Thanks for having me.
Doing good. So tell us about yourself and your family.
Well, I live in St. Louis, Missouri. I just cross the river every weekday to go to St. Charles, where Lindenwood is. And I've actually lived in St. Louis all my life, which is very uncommon for academics. We usually have to move away, but I didn't have to. And my husband is a radio personality in mid-Missouri, Columbia and Jeff City. And I've got two boys, Asher and Solomon, 15 and 16 years old, and they are the joy of my life.
Okay, that's awesome. How are y'all dealing with the weather out there?
We're doing okay. Yeah, my kids are actually homeschooled, so they don't need to go anywhere. It doesn't change anything for them. And Michael does his radio show remotely, and I can do my classes remotely. So we're okay.
Good deal. So tell us about your work and the purpose of the Hammond Institute. Let's share with us that.
Yeah, so the Hammond Institute for Free Enterprise started in about 2013, and the idea was to just focus some endowment dollars on, thinking deeply about our constitutional tradition and particularly free markets. And but I wanted to bring in, my own little flavor, to the Institute, because there's several of us that make up the Institute, and I really want to emphasize human flourishing and the role of moral virtue in a well-functioning society. And so I've been able to do that, which has been wonderful. I've also been able to emphasize things like criminal justice reform and many of my passions that really overlap with both of those, and sometimes in ways that you might not think. So for instance, one time we had a conference on re-entering citizens becoming entrepreneurs.
Okay.
And so we blended our constitutional concerns with our market stuff.
Okay.
And so we do anything in sort of that liberty realm.
Okay. All right. So when you say free markets, can you describe to our audience what you're talking about?
Well, I consider I mean, that's a big question. I guess
Yeah.
I would say I consider probably the greatest sort of central argument to come from Hayek,
Okay.
F.A. Hayek, the economist, who makes the point that even if men were angels, right? Even if we all worked hard for the community, no matter
Yeah.
what, and all of those problems about central planning were solved, we would never be able to solve what he calls the information problem or the knowledge problem. And that is that the central planner just can't know, how to efficiently allocate resources. And so when you want to have a flourishing economy, which is very highly connected to human flourishing and self-reported happiness and other things like that, you really do have to allow the evolutionary, sort of the social evolution that naturally occurs when you have a solid rule of law, property rights, contract rights, etc., that are protected. And then it bubbles up, right? And it's this beautiful, organic, complex thing. And so you want to have the right boundaries on it, in terms of rights, but you don't want to always be in there trying to micromanage, because in fact, you actually can't do it without creating weird unintended consequences and stuff that you didn't mean to make happen.
Yeah.
And so that's the basic argument. And I think you can apply that in a lot of different contexts.
Okay. So you mentioned another word that I just love, human flourishing.
Yeah.
Like I talk about that all the time. From your perspective, can you talk about human flourishing as it relates to, just the work that you do in terms of economics and virtue theory?
Yeah. Wow, that's a great question. So human flourishing, I often think of the biblical term shalom. We think of shalom as peace, it translates as peace, but it actually means something more like wholeness.
Mm-hmm.
And, for something to be whole, to be complete, to be actualized, that you have capacities that aren't laying dormant, they're being developed, right? And they're growing. And so that's what I think of when I think of human flourishing. And, you have to be very subtle about this, because it's not as though just having wealth automatically means you're flourishing. That's not true, right?
That's
you
correct.
can just
That's
be,
right.
You can be languishing on a yacht somewhere and not developing anything.
Exactly.
So that can happen. But in general, that sort of crazy levels of wealth isn't what we're talking about, right? When we look at the whole globe, we're talking, and the whole amazing elimination of abject poverty, over the last couple of hundred years, and specifically the last 40 years, there's been a huge leap forward in terms of regular people who were in terrible, normal really for human history, but still terrible poverty, who now can go to, they can send their kids to school, right? They can build wells for clean water. They can, all of the things that are going to make up human well-being for them, and their ability to develop past mere survival, right? And move into the realm of thriving. And so, you want not only for people to be able to develop, but for them to do so in a healthy way. And that's where your virtue theory comes in. So it's not just a matter of, hey, let's make everybody rich, right? But it's also a matter of, as we get rich, what's our goal, right? And our goal has to be, for me, I'm a Christian, so I think a lot in terms of love. We need the love that happens in families, and then communities, and then just sort of the solidarity that happens in a political society, and we want to feed into healthy human institutions.
That's good. That's good. So what cultivated your interest in economics and virtue theory? Can you talk to us a little bit about that? How did you arrive at where you're at today and these interests that you like to write and teach on?
That's good. Okay, so you make me go back and think about my origins, which is interesting. It does reflect my origins, actually, now that I think of it, because my dad was an evangelical pastor of a very diverse church. It was actually, I would say, about a third Black, a third Gentile Christian and a third Jewish Christian. So it
Okay.
was really an interesting mixture of people.
Okay.
And we were all Jesus. It was the Jesus freaks. It was the hippies, right?
I
And so
remember that. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
yeah, the Jesus movement, getting baptized in the river, you know.
Yes. Yes.
So he was, but interestingly, he himself was sort of a Reagan conservative.
Okay.
So he was never. It was kind of an interesting mix, right? Because he was never talking about anything like that at church, but at home, you know, we talked a lot about, you know, the problems with communism, and Reagan conservatism, for our young listeners who may not know, is totally different from Trump style populism.
Sure.
You know, where Reagan, you know, loves immigration. You know, I'm not saying he was perfect on everything, but you know, he wanted to disarm, you know, pull back on nuclear stuff. He handled Gorbachev very carefully, you know, and helped kind of move things in the direction for communism to end in the USSR. And so he was a true statesman, you know, and really incredibly clever and so forth. So anyway, so I grew up around that. I ended up becoming a libertarian, like a really extreme libertarian in college. Say it again.
How extreme?
I will have to admit to you, I probably went through an anarcho-capitalist phase.
Okay. All right. You went way. Okay.
I mean, don't we all have to at some point? No.
Yeah, at some point.
It's just like the kids on the left have to become, you know, our anarcho-syndicalists for a while.
Yeah.
But that softened over time. And that has to do actually with my reading of David Hume.
Okay.
Part of the reason that changed, which I can talk more about, but I really, today I would call myself a classical liberal. I feel like in a sense, the term libertarian has kind of gotten taken over by anarchists and a little bit to an extent. And so it's just sort of, we just are against the government no matter what. And that's, it doesn't leave any room for discussion about good government. Right. And, you know, the genius of the Constitution and things like that. So I still am friends with many anarcho-capitalists, and I think it's interesting to think about the way that public goods could maybe be provided privately and things like that. But it is an ideal theory. You know, it's not something that we're going to do tomorrow. Right. And so so that did kind of shift over time, and then my faith kind of broadened to include more of the whole sort of rich Christian tradition as well. So I got to know sort of the other denominations and things like that. And so, you know, it's been interesting to, you know, to be exposed to traditions like in the Black church, you know, where you really don't necessarily have this, you know, caring about your soul versus caring about your body or your social circumstances, as though those two things are opposed. Right. Why would they be opposed? Right. I mean, of course, God loves you, you know, your whole human person, and we are bodies, you know, that's part of what it is to be human. And so, you know, we're not just floating brains, or we're not just our souls. And so all of that to say that, you know, over time, I feel like my positions became richer and more nuanced, you know, one would hope. Right. And so that's kind of how I got to where I am today.
Okay.
Now, if you want me to go back and explain the Hume thing.
Yeah. So how did Hume pull you from anarcho-capitalism to being a classical liberal?
Yeah. So first of all, I love the Scottish Enlightenment. I love Adam Smith. I love David Hume. I think that their critique of the Cartesian Enlightenment is really spot on. Yeah. And I was really a Lockean, right? And so one way to be an anarcho-capitalist is to think that property rights are somehow kind of a metaphysical extension of the person. And then you can just sort of draw that chain all the way back to, you know, the very first, you know, whittling of a spoon out of a branch or whatever. Right. And what Hume taught me is that property rights don't actually work like that. Okay. And so property rights are, they're social in nature. I own something because I'm making a claim against others. So Robinson Crusoe on his island doesn't own anything. He doesn't need to own anything, right? He's the only guy there.
He's the only guy there, right?
Right. And if I'm, you know, if I'm on, or here on Earth, you know, if we think about things like, you know, the ocean or air, we don't divide those things into property because they're abundant. Right. And so what I realize is that property rights are something that arise under certain conditions.
Okay.
the conditions of moderate scarcity, right? So they don't arise when things are abundant, no matter how much I use them. So Locke's idea of homesteading or use, it's not exactly wrong, but it's just that it only applies when something is actually scarce. That's when we need to decide mine and thine.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the other one is limited benevolence. So, in the family, for instance, we don't buy and sell, we share, right? We're little, I always tell my sons, I'm the communist dictator, in this household.
I say the same thing. That's house is a dictatorship. It is.
I decide who produces what,
yeah,
how much, and who gets it, right? And that's okay, because there is a high level of altruism in the family, right? We all love each other dearly.
Yeah.
And, husband and wife come together and it's common property, and that's appropriate. And also because it's small. So the family, or even something as big as like a monastery, which is maybe 100 people, usually no bigger than that. You can have communism in a sense, right? Not full, communism in the sense of common property.
No, I got you.
Yeah, you can have common property because you have an extremely high level of altruism and discipline. Everyone's totally dedicated to the mission. And it's small enough that the central planner actually does know who would be best at what and how much of everything they should produce and things like that.
Yeah.
The abbot can decide which monk should do what, right?
Right.
But but beyond that, that's where you run into problems.
Yeah.
And so what Hume helped me understand is that property is something that we recognize psychologically that belongs to that person, because I have seen them, with that property for a very long time. And the truth is, and here's the kicker, if you go back in history, somebody stole something.
That's a hard truth right there.
It definitely, somebody stole something.
Yeah, that's hard truth. Yeah.
And so, if we want to go the route of everything has to be a chain of just exchanges, forget it. There is no way. All property rights currently are illegitimate. And do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I've thought on that, and that's a tough pill to swallow. But you're right. The things that we have benefited from, if you will, are off of an injustice, if you will, if you're looking back, an injustice happening to somebody else. And
at some point, it's in there. Yeah. And so what Hume is saying, it's the usefulness of, and when he says utility, he doesn't mean, he's not a utilitarian. So he's not saying that in the Benthamite sense.
Yeah.
He's talking about the usefulness to every individual in the society. So it's the usefulness of recognizing and associating property with the people who have possessed it for a long time. That's why we embrace property rights, and of course all the classic arguments from Aristotle and Aquinas about people working harder and wanting to hand it down to their children, and taking better care, and all of that. Sort of the classic defense of private property goes with that, because that makes it more useful.
Right.
And so if we can go back and trace the injustice, then it should be righted. And you see that in cases like, art that was stolen from Jews by Nazis.
Yeah, that's correct.
Right. And we say, no, everybody go, even if the museum spent a lot of money on it, we should go back and return it, because we can trace the injustice. But he says, eventually you lose the ability to do properly do, have to kind of move on. And the advantage to this view, besides the fact that I think it's true, is that we're admitting that property rights are not about people getting what they deserve in some cosmic sense. Who deserves Paris Hilton's wealth, her or Mother Teresa? Well, look, my vote's going to be for Mother Teresa. Right. But that's not the point. The point is that we will get into endless debates over who is virtuous and who deserves it and what counts and how you should distribute it. And it'll never end, and we'll be in constant war. Yeah. What we actually need is just have a settled rule for how property gets distributed. And you know what? One of the rewards we give to Mr. Hilton for making all those nice hotels is that he gets to give it to his ridiculous daughter, and there's nothing we can do about it.
Yeah.
And so you can, when people go, oh, it's, people work really hard, but they don't have as much. You can say, yeah, that's true, right? No one's saying that people have what they deserve cosmically when it comes to property. They just have what follows from the social rules we have chosen, or the legal rules we have chosen.
Legal rules, yeah.
And so we just bite the bullet on that one. We just say we do this because it's useful.
That's good. That is good. So the term classical liberalism, I think, if I was to probably ask my child about, liberalism, they would have a completely different understanding of what that means. So when you say that you're a classical liberal, help a everyday individual understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, so I have to do this in all my classes that I teach. And it's fun at Lindenwood because we have so many international students.
Okay.
And so I say to the international students, what does the word liberal mean in your country? And they say, it's totally different from how Americans use it. I was so confused when I got here because liberal comes from liber, meaning free, like liberty. Right. And so the liberals in their countries are the free market people. They're the ones that sound like our libertarians. And so they are always so confused when they get here. And the truth is that I don't know the exact way that the word changed over time, but I think it was only in maybe the 70s or something. It was pretty late that we started using the word liberal in contrast with conservative to mean maybe slightly to the left.
Right.
And now what's interesting is that we now have the really intense progressives who almost go beyond liberals. The old 60s and 70s liberals would have been very pro free speech and ACLU types. Right. And so I think of those people still as liberals in a certain sense. They're welfare liberals like John Rawls.
Right.
Meaning that they want to say, we also base our view of proper government on freedom, the concept of freedom, and even the freedom of the individual.
Yeah.
But we want that freedom to be meaningful.
Yeah.
By providing certain basics.
Basics. That's correct.
Yeah, exactly. As opposed to the classical liberals who have more of that negative view of freedom.
Right.
That I'm free when I'm not being interfered with, and how I do in life will depend on the civil societies that I'm a part of and things like that. And not on government. But both welfare liberals and classical liberals are liberals in the sense that they base their idea of good government on the freedom of the individual. And so in philosophy, we use the term liberalism in that global way, the way that it's used internationally, which can get very confusing when we talk to regular people on the street.
Because they've got the political framework because that's what's beaten in all of our heads.
Exactly.
On a constant daily basis. Yeah. So
in my own practice, I actually use the term progressive to refer to leftists in general. Unless they're full communists or something, which some of them are, but but progressives are they just love central planning. So so I use the term progressives, and I try to actually avoid the term liberals because it gets very confusing in my writing. And then I also think that a big part of this story was the fusionism, right, with conservatives and libertarians, dealing with communism. Yeah. And so anyway, part of it is just the way the American story kind of went, that we started using words in slightly different ways.
Yeah. Hey, we are here with Rachel Ferguson, and we are talking everything about classical liberalism and David Hume and the like. And when we come back from our short break, we're going to get into some more questions with her. So we'll be back in a moment.
Imagine you have it all.
A warm bed and a full fridge.
No want, no worries, and no fear of tomorrow. Then disaster strikes. Your world is turned upside down.
You are now broke, hungry, trying to survive.
This is a story of people like me.
Like me. Like me.
Like me.
Like me.
And people like you.
Now picture this, a community of compassion, a place of second chances. You can give a home to the homeless here in Conway, Arkansas, Learn how at www.hopevillagecoho.org. Thank you for making hope happen.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Dr. Philip Fletcher here, and we are back with Rachel Ferguson, who is the director of the Liberty and Ethics Center in the Hammond Institute. And Rachel, so coming out of Trump administration, also in the context of things that have happened in terms of racial unrest, Black Lives Matter, you have things happening in Portland and Seattle, just COVID, a whole bunch of different variables. It seems like they have converged to create a real sense of, well, I would say it has increased a polarization on just a whole lot of different levels. You did a talk, Disagreeing Agreeably. I want us to understand how we can engage in discussions where there's going to be disagreements and how we can move forward. Because now we've got a new administration, and while there are things that were addressed or protested against in 2020, we still got COVID going on. There's still things that need to be addressed. But the question is, how do we do those things? How do we sit at a table with differing points of view and try to come up with a way to develop some solutions? So can you speak to that?
Well, I think, the first principle for me is the Imago Dei, the image of God. And that's the idea from my faith tradition that human beings are infinitely precious, that they have inherent dignity and value because they're made in the image of God and they're his creation and his children. And what that means is that I don't get to, I don't allow myself to, let's say it's against my religion, to get on social media and call people idiots and morons and vent my spleen, on people. And so that's a really good discipline. Because, I've deleted a lot of tweets, I thought, you idiot, and then I go, oh, no, I'm not allowed to do that. So it's a great discipline. It pulls you back. And then you have to remember, this is a human person, which is particularly hard to do in the age of the smartphone, where we are not flesh and blood with each other. I'm talking to people who are faceless, nameless, words on a keyboard. I'm not with them in a room. I don't have to answer to their friends for the way I treat them. There's no accountability, right? I'm really only accountable to myself and God in some sense, in how I treat them. And so we have to be doubly intentional about remembering the humanity of every person that we deal with, no matter how off the off base, we think that they may be. I mean, I've had 3 people in the last week, young people, tell me that they are actual communists. Okay. And my heart stops. To me, that's like somebody saying they're a Nazi. I can't. I'm like thinking, do you know about the Gulag? Right. And so it's but I have to remember that this is a young person. They're coming from the perspective they're coming from, which is probably a lot of indoctrination about, how capitalism is oppressive or something. And they're, they're idealistic and they haven't thought it through. And so by reminding myself of their perspective, I'm able to treat them with grace and mercy. And I think you could say something just like that for someone who believes in QAnon, and you could think, this is the most ridiculous stuff I've ever heard in my life. And David French made a great point in an article he actually published today. About the fact that those weird ideas come through a community and people are lonely. And they're getting online and they're finding community. Or in their churches sometimes, coming up with some of this weird stuff. Right. And so if you're going to have any effect on them, you also need to be relational with them, because you may be asking them to walk away from a community that has defined their social lives. If you're asking them to reject certain ideas. And so really just the human side is so important. Now, of course, I want to say, have good sources and always back up what you say with, and all of that. But I think it's the human side that is getting lost.
I think that you bring up, that's good to bring up that a lot of these ideas, theories, conspiracy or not, they're not done in isolation. They are coming from a group of people who, previous to last year, who get together, probably more so online now, who get together, who discuss these things, go back and forth with them. And it does build a shared sense of I'm part of something. I'm not alone in this. And then it becomes, now I'm thinking from a religious standpoint, if I'm calling a person out of one community into another community, what am I offering them? What is compelling about what I'm calling them to, in distinction to what they already, and being sympathetic to that actually, and what you're talking about, because they are a human being. And if we would all be honest, whether you're a QAnon person or a, Black Lives Matter, Antifa, you voted for Trump or Biden or whomever, that's still, you are a community of people who have made an action or are announcing a particular belief or idea about life that has been developed with other people. And I think that's important. That's a very good point to remember.
And then I want to just throw in one other principle, which is just truth. And this has been the anchor for me, through all of this polarization and tribalism that we're seeing, which is that the ways that things have been bundled together politically may or may not be logical. That, there may be no logical connection between one thing and, one value and another. And so the example I used in that talk I gave, I said, if I told you what I thought about abortion, why would you think you knew what I thought about climate change? Those are two totally different issues that are completely unrelated in terms of facts, right? And yet we think we know. If I know one, I know the other.
Yeah. So I've seen it happen is, like your example, if I, come out as being someone who is for a woman's right, to make a decision about her body, right? And someone says, well, you're a baby killer, right? And I said, well, I didn't say that. I just said I was about a woman's choice about her body. But then they say, well, then you just must believe this about climate change. You believe this about guns, and then you believe this about immigration. Well, whereas those have no relation to what I'm talking about right now. I may actually agree with you on immigration, depending on where you're coming from. And so,
I will say this, one really nice thing about being, basically libertarian or classical liberal throughout my life, my adult life, has been that, I'm used to taking positions that, make me an exception to the rule. So if I'm around conservatives, there's going to be some things we agree on and there's going to be some things we disagree on. And if I'm around progressives, it's going to be the same way, except different things, And so what that means is that I have a certain tolerance for being the odd man out. But the truth is that that's very hard. That's very hard for people to be the odd man out, like we talked about with the community, the sense of community. And it feels good. As a matter of fact, if you read the psychological literature, you actually get like a hit of dopamine when you feel like a part of a group,
Okay.
And so every time you like that tweet and every time you say you stupid idiot, you're getting that hit, right? And that lizard brain back in the back of your the back of your skull is like, yes, I love this, So once again, it's like a spiritual discipline. It's a kind of discipline to say, this doesn't feel good to be the one who's saying something that kind of goes against the grain, but I don't think it's true. I can't say something that's not true. And so going back to that concept of truth and saying, look, and I can say very gently and sincerely with people on social media or wherever, listen, I get where you're coming from, and I get that this is controversial, but here's this thing that's just nagging at me that it just doesn't sit right with me because, there's this study that's been done, or there's this community that doesn't agree. And so I can make people curious. I don't have to slam them and hammer them into my view of things, because that never works anyway. You don't insult people into agreeing with you.
Right.
But you can make them curious.
Yeah.
Right. And so you can say, here's why that just doesn't seem to resonate with me for some reason. So for instance, I'm very pro educational freedom.
Uh-huh.
And I have a couple of friends who are teachers,
Okay.
And just today they were like, oh my gosh, look at what's in the legislature, the Missouri legislature, and they just want to end public education and they're in it for the money. And, so I have not responded, but I'm thinking very carefully, how can I word this and say, just so you guys know, just to add some nuance, there's actually a huge movement within Black and brown communities who feel that they have very much been marginalized by the public school system.
Yes.
And the vast majority of those parents are pro educational freedom. And we have the polls to prove it. And so, let's just think a little more deeply about this. And even if you still disagree with me at the end of the day, at least we see that it's more controversial than it's not as so straightforward as you might think.
Right. That is correct. That is true. So you had another essay, You're Not Wrong, You're Totalizing. I love that title. So you address both sides in America, looking at housing and markets was two things you address. Mm-hmm. So explain this concept of totalizing and how it's impacted our discussions, even on policy prescriptions.
Yeah, this is actually like a lodestar of my philosophical life. So I'm really glad you brought it up. Yeah. And I actually got it from a Hume scholar named Don Livingston. Okay. It's his explanation of Hume's critique of the Cartesian Enlightenment. Mm-hmm. And what he says is that, just to put it very, very simply, is that the tendency of the Enlightenment mind, the Enlightenment is wonderful in many ways, but it's rationalist in a kind of narrow way. Where it wants to say that calculative reason is the only thing that counts as reason, creativity and imagination and association. Those are all Scottish Enlightenment ideas. They're not, and so what that means is that if you're going to sort of prove something, right, or if you're going to give your reasons for thinking something is true, you have to start with some kind of undeniable first principle, and then you've got to deduce everything from that, which fails. Okay, that's why we ended up with postmodernism. Okay, this is an epistemic standard that doesn't work at all. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't lead to wisdom, which is why it's not good philosophy, because philosophy is the love of wisdom.
Wisdom, right.
Okay,
right.
So there must be other ways of knowing.
Yeah.
And deductive reasoning is great for geometry and, and things like that, but it's not necessarily great for ethics. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so once you realize that, though, you see that the Enlightenment mind can be totalizing in the sense that it tends to focus on one first principle, and that becomes like a lens through which you see the whole world, and everything is transformed according to that lens. Okay? So if I think, for instance, that, racism is, the original sin of the United States, very, very much could be correct. Then I might start to see every single issue I come across as being explained in that way.
Right.
And so it becomes totalizing. And my point is like, look, you've got really good points. It's just that you're overdoing it. Instead of saying this is a really important explanation that we need to take into account along with a bunch of other ones.
Right.
We end up saying this is the one and only explanation.
This is the only explanation. Right. Right. Right.
And we can do that in various ways. And so that's how you get, feminist glaciology or whatever, where you're trying to understand how to do, how to understand glaciers from a feminist perspective. And it's like, just because feminism has some good points doesn't mean that it affects the way you study glaciers.
Right. Right. I think it's kind of, I saw a article, because race is another thing I like to study, and out in I don't want to get this wrong, Northern California, where someone was trying to explain that, you know, making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich was racist, right? And I just said, oh my gosh. And, you know, this was given to, you know, elementary school kids. And I just wonder what that lesson plan looked like, and what was the history that they used to explain, you know, that the phenomenon of a great lunchtime sandwich, you know, was a example of, you know, systemic racism. So yeah, to be able to, yeah, that's kind of where we're at today. Is we're not nuanced in our thinking, not understanding, you know, you can't apply one thing to everything, right? It can add some helpful perspective on the situation, but to lock yourself, I think, like in concrete shoes, and like, this is the only way for it to be explained, and as such, this is going to produce whatever solutions come out of that. I think, you know, it puts us in a very precarious situation, and then it becomes tribal again, because then if I don't share that view in this particular instance, we circle back around again, then, well, you're just this way, right? And that's just not fair. And I think it depersonalizes an individual, because you're not honoring their perspective and what they are bringing to the table in regards to this particular situation. So, sorry, I
mean, I actually think that this is. Oh no, that's okay. And I'm a little glitching, but I can hear most of what you're saying.
Okay.
I hope I'm coming through okay.
Yeah, I got you.
I think this. Okay, good. I think this is actually one of the senses in which I really appreciate the conservative tradition. But by conservative here, I mean like reflective conservatism, like Russell Kirk or someone like that, who is anti-ideological. I mean, that's actually sort of the idea, is that conservatism isn't an ideology. It's the rejection of ideology. It's the idea that life, that your sources of authority are multivariate in your life. And so it could be your tradition in your town. It could be your church tradition. It could be your political tradition. It could be the way that the economy is set up. All of these things are sources for the way that you live your life, and that's okay.
Yes.
And where, you know, for instance, if you look at some of the more ideological feminists, what do they say? They say everything is politics, right? Everything is politics. Politics can't just be one part of your life. It has to be everything. Well, I could say that about theology. I could say that about philosophy. I could sort of say that, you know, but then in another sense, it's like, no, sometimes I have a private part of my life that isn't politics.
Yeah.
And that's okay too, right? I just want to live my life and take care of my family and so forth. And so that totalizing tendency has become, I think, just kind of a knee-jerk thing, where it absolutely leads to tribalism, because if I understand that the sources of authority in my life are multivariate, then I can take a look at somebody else and I can say, well, maybe I think they're overemphasizing something, but there may be some core of truth. There's a kernel in there that I can appreciate.
Right.
But if they're not adopting my lens, if I'm looking through an ideological lens and they're not adopting my lens, to hell with them.
Yeah.
You know, and that's why I see Trump style populism as being totally not conservative, because they're adopting that same sort of, and I don't mean people who just voted for Trump because they, you know, wanted his policies or his judges or something. I'm talking about the real diehards, you know. Because they're, you know, rejecting their family members over it, and you know, they're totalizing it. And I'm thinking, that's not the conservative way. You know, the conservative way is you know, civility and remaining in conversation and persuasion. You know, the power of persuasion and the power of civil society. Yeah. Right. And so there's something very ideological, I think, about that style of populism.
Yes. So as a classical liberal, looking at our economic situation, taking into context, you know, we've been battling a pandemic. Speak to persons who are in poverty and low income situations. How does classical liberalism speak to them? What can they glean from that approach in improving their economic situation?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say I'll be twofold on this one. So the first one is that we really underestimate, and maybe even a lot of classical liberals do in terms of the on the ground gritty reality. We really underestimate how much the bureaucracy is stopping poor people from breaking out of poverty. And I just talked to my friend Kathalina Mons in Georgia the other day, and she works at an HBCU there. She works with students who want to become entrepreneurs. And they hit a wall of bureaucracy, of regulation, of, you know, just all of the hoops you have to jump through and how often they change and how confusing they are. And it is so discouraging to them. And so, you know, one of the insights that has to do with things like healthy deregulation, things like lowering the number of occupational licenses, you know, the ability to move around with your license, you know, like Arizona has done, where you can go there with the license from other states. That's going to mean so much for working class people who are thinking, you know, I could start a lawn business. I could start a barbershop. I could do all these things, except you can't, because there's some established business that has gone to the legislature and gotten something passed to stop you.
Yeah.
And that's why you can be arrested for barbering without a license because the salon down the street doesn't want you to be in operation, right?
Right.
Or the fact that in Tennessee, for the Institute for Justice has worked on this, but the fact that in Tennessee you had to have a high school diploma to be a barber. Why? Why do you need a high school diploma to be a barber? I don't know.
I don't know, because when I was in high school, brothers were cutting hair in high school.
That's right. That's right. You learn by apprenticeship. Okay, that's how it's always been done.
Yeah.
And and of course we know the example in Missouri and in other states of the African hair braiding. You know, where the salons came in and said, well, you know, you need to have $20,000 cosmetology school. And these women are going, nothing in cosmetology school teaches me anything about African hair braiding, which I already know how to do.
Exactly. Yes.
And so, and those are just examples, but there's so many of these. I mean, I was just watching Good Bones on HGTV the other day, you know, where they knocked down houses in Indianapolis to fix them up. And, you know, they had some new code variation thing. And they're like, what? You know, it's new. And they just passed it. And they said, it was interesting to me to watch the mother and daughter explain, our code book is this thick. It's so hard to keep track of. And it costs so much money to apply for these variances. They're complaining, and they're upper middle class, successful business women, right? They're not just trying to break in for the first time.
Right.
So that's just, I think a lot of progressives, and maybe even more of us, just don't realize how stultifying that is to people who are just trying. They have hard skills and they just want to monetize them like anyone else.
Yes.
And so that's really frustrating, number one. And number two, classical liberalism has a really strong emphasis on civil society. And the idea that it's not just government and market, right? It's not just what you do in commerce and what you do with the state. It's all the stuff in between. It's your church. It's your bowling league. It's your Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. It's your, you know, it's your fraternal society, right? It's all of these things. And we cannot believe, I mean, we cannot realistically say that people from totally destabilized neighborhoods who are dealing with high crime, severe trauma, you know, missing parents, you know, drug addiction, etc., that what they need to fix their problems is a check in the mail. Come on. Do you really believe that that is going to work? That's insane, right? There's no way that's going to work.
Right.
People need to be surrounded with love and support by people who they can touch and that they can trust. and that they can pray with at midnight, when somebody gets murdered on the corner.
Yeah.
And I'm using these examples because I'm getting them from my friend Lucas at Love the Lou. I mean, these are his examples.
Yeah.
And so we've got to focus on neighborhood stabilization that is holistic. It's shalom, right? It's flourishing.
Bringing this full circle. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So instead of sending somebody out and saying, well, we have this program on Thursday where we'll teach you about financial responsibility. No, you have to walk with people through life, because what people in destabilized neighborhoods missed is the stuff that a lot of us take for granted. It's the networking. It's the knowledge you got because you were just hanging around your parents while they paid bills, or while they, ran their business, right? Or your uncle got you your first job at his car dealership or whatever. Because you're surrounded by people who have a high level of employment. You're surrounded by people who have a high level of marriage. You're surrounded by this. And so you just kind of know it. But if you're someone who is not surrounded by those things, then you need someone to walk with you through life and who cares about your block, the block you live on, the neighborhood you live in, down to the street level, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm a huge proponent of and this is the practical side. You asked me, what's the big takeaway from my work? Because, I've got all these ideas and I love to talk about emergent order and property rights and all this stuff. And it's important. But if you're just a Joe Schmo person out there listening to this and you're not a philosopher, you can pick up your phone. You can pick up your phone right now. Here's a practical thing you can do. You can pick up your phone right now and you can call the charity. You can call your mission board at your church. You can call the charity you're involved with, right? You can call a meeting. You can say, we all need to read When Helping Hurts by Brian Fickert. We need to read Toxic Charity by Bob Lupton. Yep. We need to look at the Christian Community Development Association, with John Perkins. We need to learn this stuff and not just learn it. We need to do it. Okay, so the Chalmers Center will help you do that at your church, for instance, just as an example. They'll help you go from idea to execution. Yeah. Because we've got to stop with the philanthropy that undermines dignity. Got to stop. It's not helping, it's hurting.
Yes.
And we kind of know it, but we don't want to admit it because we've always done the Christmas shoe boxes, and so we don't want to stop. And it takes way more effort to get to know a neighborhood and to start a Christmas store, right? And invite people in the neighborhood to work there and yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
But you know what? A dad who walks into that store, and you know what I'm talking about, Phil.
I do. Yeah, I do.
A dad who walks into that store and buys that discounted toy and he picks it and he pays for it and he wraps it and gives it to his child. We have just honored his dignity as a father.
I feel like I need to stand and applaud you for so much. Like, it is speaking to my heart.
I am on fire about this stuff. Yeah. I mean, I am on fire about it, and I want Christians to repent. I mean, I really do. And non-Christians, who want to do philanthropy right and who care about the poor. We have to repent of things, and maybe it was ignorance and maybe it was laziness, whatever. Mm-hmm. But whatever it is, stop and change your mind. Turn around.
Yes.
And there are these wise people. Lucas Rugley of Love the Lou is going to be doing an event next week at Hammond Institute that people can come to if they want and hear about it. And there are wise people who have walked this walk and they know how to do it. And we should just sit at their feet, soak it up, and bring it to the neighborhoods that we can minister to.
Yes. Yeah. When I first got started my nonprofit, somebody gave me the book, When Helping Hurts. And I read it, and it dramatically undid everything that I think most people are, commonly understanding they're supposed to do. And the whole concept of relief, development, and restoration was huge for me. And those distinctions, just really, how can we affirm the dignity that's already residing in people who consider being in poverty, low income, and that they have something to bring to the table as well. And so that was huge for me. And it radically shaped, the way I approach nonprofit work and what I consult other people in doing. And it's huge. And the other thing, it takes it takes some humility to say, I can only bring so much to the table. I need your insight. I need your experiences as well, so that we can do this together. And
right.
I talk about
maybe not being a member of the neighborhood, I don't know the solution.
Exactly.
And I can be helpful, but I need to hear what the neighbors want to do.
Exactly. Yeah. And then I'll do my part, you do your part, and then we can do this together. And that's one of the things I even changed. We don't do things for people. We do things with people.
That's it.
Just that language just changes the whole perspective. And that was beautiful. You brought that up. So in conclusion, so what are you currently working on at Hammond Institute?
Yeah, so my main project at the moment is my book. So I'm co-authoring with Marcus Witcher, who is a native Arkansan. Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
Arkansan. I am co-authoring a book called Black Liberation Through the Marketplace.
Ooh, I can't wait to read this one.
I am so excited. And the point, I wrote the book I wanted to read, really. Because what I knew is that classical liberals actually have a ton of work that they've done on discrimination and race, but it's all just sort of spread out because they don't tend to categorize things in those terms. They hadn't brought it all together into one place. And so I wanted to just take up, it's really too ambitious because I kind of start with slavery, I go all the way back and I do a big, kind of a big overview where we look at some of the ways that a classical liberal thinks about American history, particularly with regard to the systemic oppression of African Americans. And they bring a really interesting perspective, for instance, the debate over, is slavery, is it by nature connected to capitalism? Right? Because if it is, that's no good for capitalism, right? And so we've got to explain actually that it's not. It's extremely inefficient. It makes some people rich, but it doesn't make the general area rich, et cetera. Right. So you get into those sorts of things. And then as I go through, obviously we get to, all of the Jim Crow exclusions from economic activity. And I think people both on the left and the right are beginning to realize how much Blacks were kept out of their ability to participate in the economy. And when they did do well, they got attacked. In many cases, like in Tulsa. Right. And literally had their goods and their persons just directly. I mean, it was domestic terrorism. They were just directly attacked. And then at the end of the book, obviously the drug war, mass incarceration, those sorts of issues. I kind of go through historically. And then at the end in my solutions chapter, I talk about things like neighborhood stabilization, as well as criminal justice reform, but also economic freedom. And that's the thing, is that in a lot of those people who focus on Black oppression don't understand economic freedom. And so they end up missing a huge piece of the solution, and they're always looking to the state. And then the state always ends up doing stuff that's even more racist than the last thing they tried.
And a lot of history shows that a lot of times it was the state that did things to Black folks that wasn't for our good.
Listen, the redlining was the Federal Housing Administration. I mean, they came in and drew the red lines and said, you can't insure these people. And so people need to know that. I mean, a huge part of eminent domain abuse of African Americans was the highway system, the federal highway system coming through and being abused in order to keep people segregated, et cetera. So one of my goals with the book is to help conservatives to talk intelligently about our history of racial oppression in a way that, because I can show them, look, this systemic oppression is real, you guys. It actually comes in the form of violating people's property and contract rights, which you as conservatives care about. Right. And their religious freedom and many things. Right. And that conservatives care about. And so instead of doing this tribal thing where if you think about racial oppression, you must be a leftist, I want to that says, no, we can be extremely sensitive to our history of racial oppression in a way that does not buy into some crazy leftist ideology in any way. And we can bring solutions and a little bit, critique our progressive friends who do give a lot of lip service to these issues, but often their solutions are very push button, very magical thinking.
Right.
And so we can say, that's not going to work, and you need to get in reality and think about what will really change things for people who are still suffering today.
Yeah.
So that's the point of the book, and I'm very excited. The book is finished and it's rough draft.
Okay.
So I'm editing and getting a publisher and all that kind of stuff, and hopefully it'll be out in the fall.
All right. Awesome. Congratulations.
Thanks.
How can people connect with you?
Well, my blog is rachelfergusononline.com.
Okay.
So you can check me out there. You can leave me messages there, but I'm also happy to be contacted personally at my email, rferguson@lindenwood.edu. I'm also on Twitter. I'm actually on Twitter as @LibertyEthics.
Okay.
But if you look at my name, you'll find me. Do follow me on Twitter if you like what you've heard, because this is a lot of the stuff I think about and talk about on Twitter, and I'm on Facebook as well.
All right, good deal. So finally, what is one thing you want people to know about the impact of your work?
One thing that I want people to know, I think the one takeaway I hope everybody has is to reject the tribalism. Just reject it. Mm-hmm. Just know that you can hold positions that don't fit one tribe or the other because they're true, and that you can continue to seek the truth. You can change your mind. And we can create a community among one another of people who are truth seekers and who are willing to have beautiful, kind conversations, and we can respect one another and think deeply about things. I know that's what you do, Phil. So I know you're in that community for sure. And so we can provide that community for one another so that those who are caught up in it have some place to go.
Yeah.
Come to us and we will totally receive you in the journey that you're on, and we'll help you think things through, and we'll be kind. Yeah,
that's beautiful. Rachel, thank you very much. This has been very fruitful and engaging discussion. I'm going to have you back again because I want to talk about this book.
Wonderful. I'd love to.
I'm excited about that book right there. I think that
Thank you.
That's a very necessary work that needs to be put forward to provide another perspective on providing a road towards economic freedom, not just specifically regarding Black Americans, but I believe I think it'd be generalized to whoever, regardless of ethnicity. So
absolutely.
That's
the oppression of African Americans is just one example of the way that the state can get in the way. That's right.
That's it. Hey, thank you very much.
Thank you. This was fun, Phil.
Yes. Hey, for everybody, thank you for joining us for the Humanity Matters one-on-one on September. Geez, I'm jumping way ahead. On March 14th at 5 p.m., we will be having Spike Cohen, an interview with the former 2020 Libertarian vice presidential candidate, and have an opportunity to interact with him as we talk about libertarianism and the ABCs of that. And y'all remember to be loved, to be kind, to be generous, and remember to live in hope. We can do the impossible. Take care. God bless.